Happy Father's Day. And yes, of course, I know that this is not technically a religious celebration. But anytime my adult children gather and have to pay for my lunch and entertainment is a great occasion. Did you know the beginnings of Father's Day, by the way? Does anyone know this history? I read this past week just to get an inkling of it. It is a holiday that was sponsored first by Sonora Smart Dodd from Spokane, Washington. She was the first to propose that there should be a day set aside, Father's Day, to celebrate fathers. And she did this on behalf of her own father in 1909 to honor her widowed Civil War veteran father who had raised 6 children alone. That's right. When a man does something like that, you give him a holiday. Now, when a woman does the same thing, you know what she gets, right? A second job. Okay. Actually, it wasn't until 1972 that President Richard Nixon signed into official law making Father's Day a permanent national holiday. Did you know that? So we have a Nixon, a father who did everything he could to hold on to his power to thank for this holiday. Now, why am I saying this? It sounds like I'm disparaging Father's Day as we begin this sermon, and you would be right. And partly the reason for that is that the Bible has so much to say about families, fathers in particular, and most of it is not good. Now, I remember Father's Day when I was a child. It was the one Sunday besides Christmas and Easter that Mom made my father go to church. Mom would encourage him with just the right loving words. If I remember correctly, it was something like this: "You need to go to church with us today. Some of the people at the church are wondering if I'm a widow." Worked every time. Yes, I have to blame the Bible for some of the treatment about men or families in general. And specifically, I'm blaming Jesus today because you just heard his own words in the text that was read. Just listen to some of the horrible things that Jesus has to say to us on this Father's Day. And I didn't pick the scripture out. This is from our lectionary, a tradition that's been handed down generation to generation in the life of the church, selected readings for us to encounter. But just listen to what Jesus says. "I have not come to bring peace but a sword." Pretty harsh, don't you think? "I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. One's foes will be members of one's own household." Jeez, a little rough, don't you think? And beyond these particular passages that we read this morning, you know that there are other texts. In fact, when Jesus just began some of his early ministry, one of his first sermons, and folks were disturbed by them, they called up his family and said, "Oh, you've got to get down here. It's getting unwieldy. The crowds are coming against him." And then Jesus, when his family did arrive, do you remember what he said? "Who are my mother? Who's my father? Who are my brothers and sisters?" In other words, disparaging all of them who had come down at the invitation of the leaders of the synagogue to put him under control. Yeah, Jesus doesn't seem to be a great lover of all these family values that you and I are. Or maybe Jesus didn't have a loving family. I don't know what to say. I love my family. I wouldn't speak to my family like this, would you? Especially not on Father's Day. Since 1972, at least. These are not very loving words. And that's the problem I have with Jesus. When I was a little kid, I was told that Jesus was all about loving words. And then when I got to be an adult, I then began to look at Jesus' actual words. Not a lot of loving words sometimes. Jesus, I want to propose, seems to be talking about family feuds on Father's Day, and I think it's outlandish. Maybe Jesus was just naming a current reality, though. At least that's how the scholars all approach this, is that we've got to remember the time period, and we've got to remember that maybe what Jesus was doing here is preparing the early church for failure. Any of you have to deal with failure in your lives? I know a lot of the ladies are raising their hand. I have to do that every day, Pastor. I'm married. I understand that. We're all dealing with failures, and Jesus understood that the early church, in many respects, was going to be a great failure. Because we all know that in the life of the church, now as always, what we need and what we need to survive is going to be what? Young families with children. And that means all the family here in the pews. In fact, in ages past, the church really thrived when we had families of 11 or 12, and you all came. It was like an instant youth group. Families were large, and they all came down here, and gosh, it was such a great time. But Jesus was thinking of other times in which families are divided. And one of the times in which families are most divided is when we come to church. In one family, we see the wife almost every Sunday, but we never see the husband. Don't even know if he actually exists. Another family that once took up a whole pew. Now, their 3 boys have grown up, and we never see them. They've been confirmed. People disappear on us. Someone gets divorced. Someone moves. And so families divided. Left and right divided. In fact, I would imagine almost in every church I've ever served, you could go down the membership list and you could begin to name the fact that almost every single grouping of households in that directory was divided in some way. It was as if not all of them came to the same church. They came, but they came sometimes as individuals, or they came as one parent with children. They came as a widower. They came as with someone who did not believe or even become a member, you see. And so maybe what Jesus was getting at today is that, you know what? If you don't come from that perfect family, 2 adults and 2.3 children, that's okay. In fact, there are scholars today that suggest, you know what, maybe the biggest idol we have today is not even wealth. It's not the gold. Maybe the biggest idol the church really is worshiping today is the family. And that's why we advertise it as such. When we go out there inviting people to come forward, oftentimes what we're thinking of is, yeah, we want them. That young couple with 2.3 children. We want them to come through. And how many times do we ignore, the widow who's 70? How many times do we ignore the neighbor who is elderly? How many times do we ignore the children whose parents will never darken the doors of the church, but maybe they might like kids club? How many times do we allow a false narrative to control our invitation in the life of the church or our celebrations in the life of the church? How often have we ignored the father figures, the foster parents, the grandparents who take control of the kids because their own parents have difficulties in life. And so grandparents are raising their grandchildren as their own children. And all the different types of ways we have of being families today. And now with the latest housing crisis, I wonder if we won't also begin seeing what we find in many other countries is that more and more of us in various generations will have to live together in order to survive, to make ends meet. Maybe some of that's not all bad. Is Jesus just telling us about the struggles facing all of our churches? Maybe so. We can't expect whole families to take their places in our pews again. Not now, not then, not ever. The church has always been a place of division, if we have the eyes to see it and to simply name what's really going on here. Surely Jesus did not mean that he was going to actively split up families. That was not his intention. It's not his desire, but it is a reality. Jesus understood how difficult it is to get even one family on the same page when it comes to religion. Am I right? How many of you are on the same page with religion, with your spouse, with your kids, with your uncles, your aunts, and just start naming them, and you realize, yeah, he is right. There is division in all of these households. And I think he's also making a case that in some extreme cases, sometimes a family member's words and actions present a temptation, or they present even an obstacle to others following Christ. I encountered one of those in one of the churches I served. One of the most wonderful people I've ever met in the life of the church. I mean, if we were on a graded scale as far as saintlyhood, I'd put this person up at the top and I'd put me way down at the bottom, because she was always at the church, helping with communion, helping with visits, helping with the women's group, serving any way she possibly could for the life of the church. In fact, she was so dedicated that not many people will do this. On a Sunday afternoon, when I would go once a month to the local nursing home to give services, she was the one that would arrive about 2 hours early and start gathering up the residents so that they would all be gathered for me as soon as I got there in the common area for the worship service. Now, she did that because if she didn't do that and we just let the staff at the nursing home do it, well, that was uneven at best. And many times, you know what it's like in any of those institutions, not a whole lot of help on the weekends, and then it would have been a very small gathering, or Pastor Poe would have to figure out who's who and bring them in. And no, she did that. She did that. That's why there was 40-some people at every one of those services when I went. I used to think that she must have belonged to the church since the time she was knee-high to a grasshopper, right? Had been one of those spiritual people all of her life, had lived and grown up in the church. I figured that's who she is. And then one day I began talking like that, and an elder of the church said, "Oh, no, you got that all wrong. Actually, it wasn't until about 15 years ago that we ever saw her in church." What? I can't believe this. She was one of those people that when she was on vacation, she would bring me the bulletin from where she went to church. Folks, I don't even do that. They said, no. Her husband, she was married to someone who was kind of a hard person to get along with. So she was members on the church rolls, but we never saw either one of them. But then he passed away. And apparently he had never really let her go to church because he didn't want to go to church. And so in the old school, sometimes, the husband ruled the roost, and sometimes the ladies did exactly what their husbands told them to do. But once he died, she said, well, now he can't keep me from going to church. And she came every single Sunday. To me, I don't know much about their relationship, but it certainly seemed like there was an obstacle there, wouldn't you say? There was an impediment to her involvement in the life of the church. She was able to overcome it. I look around the room today, and I know you, but I don't know you well enough to know. But every single Sunday, I have to imagine that there are a few folks in the congregation who are living with such terrible obstacles that we would never even know. And yet, here you are. You overcame it. You overcame a temptation, or you stepped over an obstacle, or some of you had a good plan to divorce in order to do it. Let's face it. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Wow. I mean, really, when you stop and read that, this is a section that I would like to gloss over. I would like to just skip it, mark it off of our Bibles. It doesn't sound like kind words from Jesus, does it? At least that's not how I read it. It sounds very challenging. And it sounds as if we're supposed to not be so lovey-lovey towards our families in this text. Or maybe Jesus, once again, is trying to make a statement here. I think this verse helps us. It helps us to understand the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments still apply, right? Remember that commandment? Number 6 or 5, it all depends on the scholars and how you count these things. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And so when you combine the two, what Jesus, I think, is clearly saying, don't love anyone else or anything to the detriment of God. Do you see how that works? Sure, we want you to love your spouse and your children. I don't think he's saying anything against that. No one here thinks that that's the case. But did we really stop to think about what did he mean by it then? And it's this. Don't love something more to the detriment of God. Not that boyfriend, especially the ones who are abusive. Not the adult who makes you question your own self-worth. Not the stranger or even the family member who keeps you away from God. Not even those who love you and treat you well. Sometimes they too can be our biggest obstacles to loving God, and so they become sort of a detriment. Okay, it really got quiet in here. I guess I made my point. It's hard to say these things, and yet we know there's some truth involved in this, isn't there? I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the 3rd and the 4th generation. Sorry, kids, grandkids. Well, that's pretty tough when you think about it. Really? Punishment for things that others did? And yet we all have experienced some of that. I knew this one family in which they were just wonderful people. I thought they were the greatest. But if you went around town, there was a different story that people would tell. Oh, you're talking about those Josephs, are you? Yeah, they've been drunks forever. Generation to generation. Losers, drunks. They're always kind of village idiots. Anybody with that last name, tell your kids, tell your grandkids, stay away. You get what I mean? Sometimes we do see this. It seems like the sins of one generation follow the next and the next and the next. And even today, now, you know, the other day, some of the kids, well, I wouldn't know them, not that great, but they were kind of accusing me of the DNA I gave them. Dad, this is why we're screwed up. It's your DNA. We're going to have these diseases. We're going to have this and that because you and Mom didn't have the right DNA. Yeah, we know about this 3rd and 4th generation stuff. Whether we did it intentionally or not. Of those who reject me, but showing, now here's the interesting part, but showing steadfast love to the 1000th generation. Now, I didn't do very well in math, but 1,000 generation is like a really long time. Am I right? I'm not sure that in the Poe history, I don't even know if there's 1,000 generations of us. You know what I mean? Of those who love me and keep my commandments. So I find this math very interesting if you do the math. So if you sin once, well, that affects up to the third and fourth generation. But if you do loving acts, that affects up to 1,000 generations, which seems to me to cancel out the first. What do you think? Am I doing that right? I don't know. I guess I need to think about that. Maybe you need to think about that. It seems to me that almost no one will be ultimately punished, and if you are punished, you're not going to be punished for long, because God would rather show you steadfast love. Which is what I've experienced from my parents, is that they would oftentimes threaten punishments that they never followed through with. They were bad at that. They often said things, and then they said, I really didn't mean it. I shouldn't have said that. Oftentimes, it does seem like there's more steadfast love than there ever is punishment. And some of us like that, don't we? Some of us are glad that we grew up in those kind of homes where the steadfast love seemed to be for 1,000 generations and the punishment small. In fact, I even noticed that one of my daughters, whenever I was sent to punish, I would have to give a little spanking once in a while, and apparently I couldn't do it hard enough to keep her from laughing. So we had a pact together. Now, you need to just act like I did something, so that way your mother doesn't send me up here to do this again. Father's Day is a good day to think about our priorities in life. Sonora Smart Dodd of Spokane, Washington, wanted a Father's Day to honor her dad, who raised her and her 5 siblings alone. She obviously wanted to express her love for his sacrifices, what he had given up in order to accomplish that goal. And today is a perfect day in the life of the church to think about your own parents, your fathers, but also your mothers, and anyone else who was parently towards you. And think about the sacrifices that they made. Let us remember the sacrifices of these wonderful people in our lives who have made us who we are. For these, I think, friends, are the faint reflections that come from the cross, where Jesus died to set us all free to new life in a new loving family called the church. And it's through those faint reflections of love that we come to know the steadfast love of the eternal God. Amen.